welcome to tonight's main event for the World Heavyweight Championship in a triple threat match. In this corner, representing Australia, we have Atrocious Anthony. You suck! In this corner, coming in from deep in the heart of Texas, we have Malicious Matt. Yeehaw! Yeah, boy. And in this corner, coming in from the armpit of the United States, New Jersey, Monstrous Manny.
So apologies, folks. Manny really wanted to do that. Right, Manny? Wasn't
Sure.
my idea.
Put a huge disclaimer in the beginning of this video. Please lower your volume.
And expectations, of course.
That's every commentary.
Exactly. So this is for Buddy Hugged, and yes, it's wrestling themed. How about that, right? So it came out on the 10th of March, 1951. It had a blue ribbon reissue sometime in 1961, and it's the 615th in the series, directed by Chuck Jones. You can find this on the Looney Tunes Gold Collection Volume 2 DVD set, and on the Platinum Collection Volume 3 Blu-ray set. I have links below to those sets. Sadly, I can't play it here, but here is a synopsis. It is wrestling time, and it is Ravishing Ronald versus the Crusher. But what's this? A new wrestler enters the ring as the Masked Terror. But who is this Masked Terror? Find out as we go through the review. Gee, I'm awful.
Why were you giving me vibes of like, you're like, this is how it goes, and we're gonna have a glass of water. I need a lot of water after that introduction.
That's right. In terms of trivia, before we get into the wrestling stuff, and I'll literally have a note here saying wrestling stuff by Manny, who's a fan of wrestling. Just a quick thing about Stitch in Time, in case you aren't aware, that is a play on Stitch in Time, which is a saying to act or deal with your problems immediately. So it's just a play on that saying. Now, the wrestling announcer in the beginning is actually modelled after a real wrestling announcer by the name of Dan Toby. He was also in a few films cameoing as, a wrestling announcer. So Manny, in terms of the wrestling trivia, because you are a fan of pro wrestling, I never got into it. I don't hate it. I admire the athletics and the stunts and all that sort of stuff. Yes, it's not real, but yes, they can really get hurt, of course, if they don't do it correctly.
I was doing a little research prior to watching this cartoon. I mean, I haven't seen this one in a long time. And as you mentioned, it came out on the 10th of March. It came out on my negative 37th birthday, so March 10th, 1951. So negative 37, go me. But anywho, yeah, Ravishing Ronald is a huge homage reference to Gorgeous George, who was the most popular wrestler at the time in the 40s and 50s. Some of the, I guess you could say, cliches now in wrestling originated from him. So his gimmick, so first off, what is a gimmick? A gimmick is pretty much purpose of your character. What kind of things make you who you are? Like, for example, Undertaker, Darkness, the Dead Man, all the scary stuff. The first two guys, of course, I mentioned are from Texas, so there you go, Matt.
Oh, there
Probably
you go.
one of the most famous wrestlers ever, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Beer drinking, giving the middle finger literally and figuratively to the man. These are, clearly the legends: Macho Man Randy Savage, the Ultimate Warrior Sting, Dusty Rhodes, all these guys.
Roddy Piper.
The Hot Rod, yeah. But yeah, pretty much you can identify a wrestler based off their gimmick, like the characteristics that make them who they are. And with Gorgeous George, he was the one that pioneered a lot of the gimmicks of just extreme flamboyance and extreme narcissism. So some of the things in the cartoon that you saw where he's coming out in like a dinner plate and they're spraying perfume and they're playing music and whatnot, that was actually how he entered the ring. Gorgeous George dyed his hair. He started adding, he dyed his hair platinum blonde. He added curls to it. He had women escort him to the ring. He was very flamboyant. He would have like perfume and everything sprayed, and he would come out to the piece of music by Edward Elgar, Pomp and Circumstance, aka the graduation theme, a lot of other wrestlers would copy that, just that extreme narcissism in their gimmick and whatnot. Even in the music itself, I mean, Pomp and Circumstance, when I listened to that, besides it being the graduation theme, that was the theme song of Macho Man Randy Savage, another legendary wrestler. And actually, years later, Macho Man Randy Savage, he had a valet. So a valet is usually a woman that accompanies a wrestler, kind of like their manager or their girlfriend or whatever. And his valet was named Gorgeous George. And in the cartoon as well, when the announcer was talking up Ravishing Ronald, he mentioned the phrase "the denatured boy," and we've heard that phrase before, in McKimson's bushy hair. And I was trying to look up exactly the time frame of when the wrestling Nature Boy came about. So, who is that? We are talking about the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, who was another heavyweight champion as well as Gorgeous George. So back then, so this is going back pre 1980s. From the 80s back, there was multiple territories that made up wrestling in the United States. So every part of the country, Texas had their own territory, California had their territory. You had territories in Florida, in South Carolina, North Carolina, all different territories that they acted as their own independent company, and they had their own characters, their own wrestlers, their own championships, but they were all united under one main thing, the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. And what the NWA would do is that they would pick one specific person to be the world heavyweight champion, and the world heavyweight champion would travel to the different territories and pretty much take on the main guys of the Missouri territory, of the Florida one. And then what happened, the territory that was located in the Northeast, in the New York area, which was called, I believe, the Capital Wrestling Alliance. I'm probably wrong. I don't have the information in front of me, but we know it better as, and it was called at that time, Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And then in 1979, it got shortened to the World Wrestling Federation, or as we knew it better in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as the WWF. And then it turned into the WWE in 2002 due to a lawsuit from the other WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, which is not as cool. You don't have pandas hitting each other over the head with chairs. If you actually trace the history, your first WWE champion was the Nature Boy Buddy Rogers. He was big in the 40s and in the 50s, and I believe he was starting to be called the Nature Boy sometime in the 50s, probably just before the production and the release of this cartoon. And also, too, like when you think about the history of television from the 50s and on, wrestling did play a huge part in making TV popular. We credit a lot of the evolution of television in the 50s, just a ton of wrestling broadcasts. In wrestling, good guys are called baby faces or faces, and then you have the villains, they're called heels. And I mean, you had heels prior to that, the evil foreigner or the really big strong guy, and people are still playing with those tropes to this day. You have the big bad heel versus the underdog face and whatnot. And I always hate when people say like, oh, wrestling is fake and whatnot. Yes, the outcome is predetermined, but what I enjoy about it, and I tell people, it's kind of like watching a musical performance where, yeah, we know that this guy, wrestler A, is going to go over. So go over means you're going to win. So you're going to go over wrestler B, but they don't know exactly how they're going to get there. Person who's in charge of putting the matches together might say, hey, wrestler A, you're going to go over wrestler B, but I need you to do this specific move at this specific time, 2, 3 specific things. Everything else, you make it up on the fly. It takes a lot of years of training and cooperation. I mean, I've heard some wrestlers say it's like kind of having a dance partner, timing the moves and exactly when to throw them on the ground. And if you mess up a move, you can kill someone. There's tons of stories of wrestlers, just the years of wear and tear in their body,
Definitely.
predetermined, but you're beating the hell out of your body in the process. And it's
Yeah.
like I always tell people, when you watch a brilliant wrestling match, you get captured by the storytelling itself, not just, oh, they're throwing each other around, but it's like watching a theatrical performance, and it's brilliant. And I've experienced a few myself in person, and you just feel the atmosphere of the crowd. And something that the cartoon that did that I really liked, and I promise I'm going to stop rambling in a second, but near the end of the cartoon, when Bugs, the face, and Crusher, the heel, Bugs is like, hey, let's shake on it, Doc. And the audience starts, saying, no, don't do it. They're like telling Bugs not to do it. And then Crusher, his voice magically changes from John T. Smith to Mel Blanc, and he snarls like the Tasmanian devil at the crowd. But it's just like so many times I've seen wrestling where it's like the crowd is jumping behind the baby face, and then the heel starts insulting the crowd or yelling at them or screaming at them or antagonizing them. And I'm just like, that's what makes wrestling so much fun. And it's cool to see that style was there in the 50s. Obviously I wasn't
Yeah.
alive back.
I didn't really grow up watching it, Manny. I mean, I knew who they were and I saw a couple things on TV and whatever, but last year sometime I actually saw a live wrestling match. It was a WWE Money in the Bank match, and one of the guys was part of it was a guy named Roman Reigns. It was cheesy and it was obviously a stage thing. It's improvised stage acting is what it is. And the fans love it. It gave me a new impression of it. It didn't make me necessarily a fan, but I was like, oh, this is a theatrical performance. That's what it is. It's improvised stunt acting. The character in this cartoon, the Crusher, was originally a boxer in an earlier cartoon called Rabbit Punch, and he goes up against the Crusher as a boxer. So there you go.
Yep, and this one, of course, voiced by John T. Smith.
Yeah, well, I was just passing by, just passing by.
Wow, so we got a nice brief hint history of wrestling there, but no, it puts this all into context, really. I mean, and the good thing about this short is you don't even need to know all that to enjoy it. You can enjoy it as a fan or as a non-fan. You'll pick up things as a fan. If you're not a fan, whatever, you'll still find everything else funny. So that's why this is such a great, entertaining, fun short. Discussing the cartoon itself, moving away from wrestling, except in the context of the cartoon. First of all, I love the voice of the announcer, which you did brilliantly, Manny.
Ladies and gentlemen, a wrestling contest.
I appreciate you doing that to open up our review and scare the heck out of all the regular viewers, which is good. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, yeah, I love that.
Goodbye vocal folds.
Again, goodbye voice acting career. No,
Yep. That was before it even started.
yeah, exactly. I do like the little touches in this one. I like the skull and bones for the Crusher. Like, yeah, he's really the heel. It's like they drive that point home that, yeah, this is the quote-unquote bad guy, and we got the skull and bones next to his name. But there's two bits of animation I wanted to point out that really stood out here. First of all, I love I guess we'll call it the ballet animation on Ronald in the beginning. So that's kind of like shades of what's to come for Chuck Jones with the What's Opera Dog. I thought that was a fantastic bit of animation.
You notice he's wearing a hairnet. Like, what wrestler wears a hairnet? That's just funny.
But my favorite has to be the animation of Bugs trying to take down Crusher. So, of course, Crusher is on one drawing. It's a held frame that's held for a very long time. But that animation of Bugs throwing his weight around, trying to, move in an immovable object, that was just amazing. The skill involved to have that done effectively is absolutely insane. And then you point out to me, Matt, he then just yawns and we finally see him move. Such an amazing bit of animation there.
There's one bit in particular where the Crusher has Bugs in a hold. He's got him between his thighs and is crushing him. Bugs pulls off his mask and then he tears it, and it's implied the Crusher thinks he's torn his shorts. The facial expression the Crusher makes is just pure Chuck Jones, and it's perfect. And then, of course, the thing where Bugs drops the safe on the Crusher, you get John T. Smith's brilliant voice acting where he's like, oh, just passing by, just passing by. Bugs kind of guides him and lies him down on the floor. It's just, that's funny. This is Chuck Jones at peak Chuck Jonesness.
Oh, exactly. Totally agree. And of course, the Crusher, I mean, one other bit of animation I should point out with the Crusher is, of course, his, all those muscles that are forming, which I know that, Manny, you're aspiring to get your gym training, with the overuse of muscle.
Well, overuse, I mean, considering professional wrestling's history of anabolic steroids, I think Crusher had a little help there.
Yeah.
When Bugs was Stiction Time, there you go, Anthony, a dad joke for you. He was singing his little jingle to the melody of Little Brown Jug.
Stitching time will save 9, especially with the needle fine.
Of course, Mel Blanc is the announcer. And even like the announcer's face, just like those beady eyes that Chuck Jones used a lot during this time period. It's just the tiniest little dots represent his eyes, and yet it tells a whole story. When Bugs, or the Masked Terror, was putting the Crusher in a sleeper hold, doesn't do a thing to him, and then Crusher uses him as a top hat, and you start hearing a little snippet of Shuffle Off the Buffalo. And I got a big laugh out of that scene.
Bugs tries to move him and nothing happens, and then the Crusher yawns, and then Bugs keeps trying and nothing happens, and then the Crusher folds him up as a hat and dances to Shuffle Off to Buffalo.
Now, in terms of rating for this one, look, I'm giving this one 9 out of 10. It's funny. It's Chuck Jones among his best at this period of time. Such incredible animation, great gags, wonderful voice work, and, and Mel Blanc, it was Bugs, of course, he's on fire as well. But, of course, John T. Smith, I think, steals the show in this one from the little he speaks. But, yeah, very entertaining. One of my favorites of this year. So, 9 out of 10 for me.
I'd give it easily an 8.5. I don't know if it's a 9 necessarily. Maybe that's just because I didn't grow up watching it very much. It was just, I didn't see it very often. But I'd say 8.5, absolutely. It's a Chuck Jones, certainly, highlight. Good cartoon.
And what about you, Manny? Let me guess, a 10?
Well, there is a wrestler with the perfect 10, Ty Dillinger. See, look at that. I tied into it. Between the two Crusher cartoons, I'm more familiar with Rabbit Punch, and I saw it tons of times as a kid. Bunny Hugged, I almost never saw it growing up, but it's still a pretty solid cartoon. And for someone who is a wrestling nerd, I have a good appreciation of it. I wouldn't quite put it as a 9. I'm like in between 8 and 8.5. Let's say 8.25. It's still a really funny cartoon, and I get a lot of the wrestling jokes, so I have a brand new appreciation for it.
And with the biggest irony is that I have no real interest in wrestling aside from seeing some of the stunts. Yet I give the highest score than the guy who loves his wrestling. So go figure. But we'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. And until next time, take care.
1, 2, 3. Ding, 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 ding.
Well, as you can see, the video's not quite over. I mean, that was the review, but we went off on so many tangents in this particular video, and a lot of you responded very well to some of the quote-unquote outtakes and extra stuff from the previous videos. So, Manny, should we give him a little something extra?
Sure. Why not?
Well, that's what I thought. So, it'll just be a still image with the raw recording after this, but yeah, I hope you enjoy and laugh along with us.
The Macho Man didn't get those muscles. Yeah, he didn't get those muscles from snapping into a Slim Jim. It wasn't all protein. Oh, no. There was some needles involved in that. Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
Oh, Macho Man. He's one of my personal favorites. He actually passed away the day that I graduated from undergrad. It was, I think, May 20th. 2011, something like that. And right just before I was about to go on stage, because I sang the national anthem for my the ceremony, and I got the news on my phone. It was right when I first got an iPhone, and it was like wrestling legend Macho Man Randy Savage passes away at the I forgot it. He was around my father's age actually. Same year he was born, actually 2 weeks before my father, in the same year in the same month, and I can't help but every time I think about it, it was right around the time they had that crazy old dude talking about the rapture, and and somebody took a picture. Oh, you might have to cut this one out, but they took a picture of it was like a picture of Jesus, whatever, just looking over something, and above him was Macho Man Randy Savage doing his patented flying elbow drop as a way of stopping the rapture. And I'm like, that's so terrible, but it's hilarious at the same time.
Oh, exactly.
And everybody was saying, thank you, Macho Man, for your sacrifice. Your flying elbow drop saved the world.
Oh, no.
I wish I could find the picture. It's hilarious.
Oh, of course. Now back to the planet Earth that's saved by Randy Savage, who, by the way, I actually only learned of from the Spider-Man movie, the first one, with directed by Sam Raimi.
Bone saw.
The bone saw.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one. But Manny,
and they kind of did an homage to that in a Ren and Stimpy cartoon, if I remember right. There was a Ren and Stimpy that did wrestling, and there was
another one.
I love that one.
Big wrestler guy, and it's Ren and Stimpy try the same thing on this big lummox dude, and it's kind of the same result basically, is trying to move an immovable object.
Yeah, exactly.
Mad Dog Hoek and Killer Cadogan. Those are Ren and Stimpy's wrestling names.
Yeah.
Oh, such a good episode.
Yeah, directed by the wonderful Bob Camp. That was
nice.
one of his
yes.
episodes. Yeah, definitely. Anything else to mention before we get into reviews?
There was one, if you want to add this into the little spiel I did about the wrestling thing, but one of the points I was trying to make was that pretty much every, different parts, different territories around the country had their own separate, their own separate champions, whatever. But who was the person that said, no, we have a gentleman's agreement not to poach each other's talent? And somebody came along in the 80s and started stealing the top stars from the different territories around the country. And who is that man? Vince McMahon. So if you learn your wrestling history, that's how the WWF became arguably the biggest wrestling company in the world. I mean, it is because he started poaching all the top guys from all the different territories. The territory system collapsed, and then in the '90s, you had the whole. This is when I was growing up watching wrestling, between the WWF with Steve Austin and The Rock and Undertaker. I used to watch WCW, which no longer exists. Guys like Sting, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, and then they were doing tremendously well in the late '90s. They screwed up. They went out of business pretty much by 2001, and it's also related to Looney Tunes in some way because WCW was owned by who? Ted Turner. And then what happened? Turner was bought out by Time Warner, and then by the time 2001 came with the whole AOL Time Warner merger, they were like, "Yeah, this wrestling company, we're bleeding money. We got to get rid of it." And what did Vince McMahon do? He bought his rival, and he became the unstoppable wrestling force that he is today. And then last year he stepped down because he's a naughty boy, and now he's back in power. And just wrestling, it's the behind the scenes stuff in wrestling is even more outrageous half of the time than what you see on every Monday and Friday night.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For
I
sure.
just I just remember when when Warner Brothers and Turner merged, there used to be these wonderful places called the Warner Brothers Studio Stores.
Oh, I miss those places so
Yeah,
much.
and
Yep.
toward the end of that, they stopped being really cool merchandise of Warner Brothers characters like Looney Tunes and Animaniacs and all that kind of stuff, and they started working in the Turner stuff. So all of a sudden, you got a bunch of crappy merchandise of Hanna-Barbera and MGM properties that they had bought, and wrestling. And it's like, what does wrestling have to do with Looney Tunes? But they had these action figures of wrestlers, and they just throw anything that would stick at the stores. It's like, come on, guys! And it was stuff you could buy at it was stuff you could buy at Target or Toys R Us, or if that's still even around, Toys R Us. But
It's back.
it's
They have
yeah,
one in New
okay.
Jersey, actually.
Yeah, but that's what they did to those stores, and then they said, "Oh, the stores have stopped selling." It's like, no, they haven't stopped selling. It's because you replaced Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote with Hulk Hogan and Scooby Doo. That's why. That's why they
For,
failed.
yeah, for sure.